morning, folks. How's it going? I'm David Valentine. I'm going to be the host for this here session. I am a program manager with the Science Museum of Minnesota, and most of my work has revolved around a lot of what is at the root of this project here, which is working with community around racial justice, looking at collaboration and power sharing. What does it look like to create with community instead of create for community? And so today we're going to be talking about the first project that I did as part of my job. Our panelists today are going to be Robbie Callahan Schreiber, the director of my department, and Frederick Edwards Jr. and Jared Pigeon, who are two of the group members, the community group members. Y'all can go ahead and introduce yourselves real quick.
Morning, everybody. My name is Robbie Callahan Schreiber. Use he, him, his pronouns. As David mentioned, I'm the director of our Museum Access and Equity Department at the Science Museum of Minnesota. It's a department that's been around since 2017 and took and organized some community engagement and more inclusive access efforts and that we've been building upon to really create more inclusive and accessible experiences here at the Science Museum. And for us, that means doing work internal, creating new collaborations across departments internally, and to be able to better collaborate and be in community with people beyond our walls. Specifically, we're looking at connecting with communities and potential audience groups who have been marginalized from our experiences and the ways that we as an institution that's 100 plus years old has oftentimes failed to identify and recognize where we are and where we aren't putting our resources and trying to develop more reciprocal relationships. On the non-9 to 5 side, I live in St. Paul near Hamline University, have a small family, 2 kids and a partner, and grew up in Rochester, Minnesota. I'll pass it over to Fred.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frederick Edwards Jr. I am currently in Fargo, North Dakota. So we are right next to Moorehead. And so technically, I am a part of the Moorehead group in regards to the STEM RJ, which has turned into more things in the community project. I'm just a community member, a part of this project, doing some really amazing things. We were able to do a homies training, which was honoring our mind in exhausting spaces. We're currently doing a podcast that is bridging information between North Dakota and Minnesota. And right now we're working on some youth summit stuff. So it's been an exciting couple of years working with the Science Museum of Minnesota. And I'm just honored to be here and thankful for this opportunity.
Yeah, greetings everybody. Jared Pigeon, he, him pronouns, coming to you from Moorehead, Minnesota. Part of the STEM RJ team. During the day, I direct diversity and inclusion here at Minnesota State University, Moorehead, and also honored to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So those are the folks we're going to be chatting with today, and we're going to be chatting about this project. I'm going to take probably the first 10 or so minutes to sort of go over what the project has been leading up until now, and then we'll go through some questions for our panel. So this project was originally funded through the National Science Foundation in 2020. So I actually started this job 2 years ago, roughly in September, and moved here to the Twin Cities on Halloween. So I just hit my 2-year anniversary. And the first thing I started working on was this project. And the goal was to work with 3 different communities, Rochester, the Fargo Moorehead area, and here in the Twin Cities. In each area, we would work with 5 different people, people doing different kinds of work, students, people who are well established in their careers, a wide spectrum of folks. And we were working with folks inside the Science Museum. So we had some evaluation staff, we had some community engagement staff, and each area was supposed to develop like one project that's centered around racial justice, informed by STEM. And the general idea was to take a look at community engagement the way it's typically done in museums and sort of flip that on its head. Typically what you will see is museums are like, we want to connect with the Black community. So we're going to do this project. We're going to think of exactly what it looks like, and then we'll find the place where community fits in. And we'll say, would you like to do this? And we were like, what does it look like when community is sitting at the ideation table? What does it look like when community shares power in the decision making? What does it look like when community guides the decision making, and when the success of the project is built around the skills that folks have out in the community, centering the community and looking at the museum as more of a place to provide resources, to provide support, to help with that project management side. So some of the principles around that, the community identifies the impacts, the audience, they decide what success looks like. Collaborators work with the institution to decide what their responsibilities are and what our institutional responsibilities are. Community members decide what role they want to do and what they can offer. Ultimately, they decide what the project is. They're paid fairly well. I would hope you all feel like you're paid fairly well. And we're responsive to their changing needs and use our resources to support the project, not to control it. And for a lot of museums, this can be kind of a scary concept of letting go of control and really committing to what it is that community members want to do. It's definitely different than other work I've done at previous institutions in the past, but it's also been extremely rewarding. So some of the ways that we went about this process were things like this. We take a look at what are these desired impacts, the target audiences, what does success look like? So for this group, we put a big sticky with communities that you want to impact, and then put smaller stickies here saying, what is the thing that you want to impact them? How do you want to impact them? And in that way, we're able to start getting all of these different people, 5 different people from an area, and get them to start narrowing down on what is their project, who is their project trying to impact, what outcomes are you trying to have. From there, we did some mining of like, what are the resources we have in our groups? What do we have access to? Who are we connected to? What skills do we have? What experience do we have? Are there any other things that we're missing? At that point, we sort of divided up like, what is the role of the institution? What is the role of the community members? So on my side, I did a lot of like setting up of the agendas, setting the meetings, sending calendar invites, sharing out notes afterwards. We were managing the logistics of the meetings. We were participants in ideating and creating and participants in the research, but we also shared research responsibilities with the community members. So the members of the regional groups, they're the ones who are deciding what is actually on the agenda and what their priorities are. They're brainstorming the activities, they're directing them, they're helping to implement them. Obviously, the meetings are scheduled around their needs. And of course, they're participating in counseling in the co-research. So from there, I tried to think about like, what are the different roles that exist in a project and what roles do folks want to fill? And by sort of making something like this, where it's like, you can do outreach, you can do accessibility management, you can help design the curriculum, we're able to see where gaps are. And we did all of this before really settling on a project. And part of the reason we do that is if you think of a big project, you're like, oh, we want to have a big giant youth summit. If people have already decided the roles that they have the capacity and skills to do, when you're deciding between projects, you can be like, oh, this is a great project idea, but we're missing someone who's good at the outreach thing, or we're missing somebody who has the technology implementation necessary for us to actually meet this. So it really helps you to assess the feasibility of the work that you're going to be doing, or decide like how much of your budget is going to need to be spent looking at like external folks where we don't have the skills that we need to accomplish this project within our group. So this might be something we need to hire out, something we need to bring someone in for. At that point, we moved on to like brainstorming. What are some cool ideas that we could be doing with the funding that we have to run these projects? So we made a big giant list. We looked at what roles are needed, who's the intended audience, what do we need, how much time would it take, do we need additional advisors, how much does it cost? This is a thing that I made essentially that sort of outlines that process that we went through all before deciding a project. Don't try to read the whole thing. It's really long and complicated. If you want access to it, you can find it on a website that I will share with you at the end of this. But essentially, it's like if you're trying to go through this similar process, what are the steps you need to go through? And how do you need to be working with community in order to actually land on a project with folks when you are not the ones who are initially deciding, oh, this is what the project is. So in that first year, we worked with the 3 groups. We had Fargo Moorehead, as Fred mentioned. They ended up crafting a youth leadership development workshop called Homies. We worked with a number of youth. We paid those youth to be there. And throughout the course of the day, they experienced a bunch of different content pieces around learning about leadership, learning about identity, learning about what it is to work in white dominated spaces when you are a BIPOC person. It was really great. And some of those folks we're still connected with even now in our 3rd year of this project. One of them actually just joined the Fargo Moorehead team. So it was really great. The Rochester group worked on a DEI focused interactive game. They ended up designing, like getting through the process of designing in that first year, but were not able to get to the point of like a website launch. They ended up, because they had a gap in the technological ability, working with someone outside who wasn't able to actually deliver on the digital aspect of the game. And then the Twin Cities group worked on a racial justice intersectionality podcast called Activism and each episode was focused on the intersection between activism and art, or activism and incarceration, or activism and the George Floyd protests. You can see the project website down at the bottom. I think there's also another link that I can share with you later on. But yeah, that was the first year, and some of the immediate learnings from that first year. I think one thing we heard consistently from all 3 groups was that they didn't want this project to be a one and done kind of thing. They didn't want to just hop in, do one quick thing, and then the museum says, we'll call you when we need you again. And so after that first year, we knew that group members wanted the work to continue. So we invested in funding the continuation of the work after the end of the grant process. So it started off as a grant funded project, but now it is funded from our operating costs within our budget. Any of the projects like the board game that were unfinished were intended to be completed. And we wanted to kick off some new work. Some group members ended up falling away, whether that's they got new jobs or had personal complications, or like it's just that's a lot to be involved in, multi-year process. And we also learned after that first year that maintaining the capacity in order to keep this work rolling was really a challenge. This was not my only project, nor is it my only project now. And so trying to figure out how to make the time to manage these different groups while also working on a documentary or working on an engineering activity and working with other departments in my institution, finding the right amount of work and right sizing the project has really been a challenge. And I think that's also been a challenge on the other side with community members, how to find the time that they have to dedicate to the work continuing, how to balance it with their personal lives and their professional lives. And so moving forward from there, last year was year 2. The Rochester group continued their DEAI board game. They changed the name of it to Allies, Accomplices, and Bystanders, and worked with a company called Software for Good. There have been some difficulties on the tech side, but I think that it will be wrapped up fairly soon here. I have a meeting on Monday with the lead software developer. He's like, there's only 5 things left to do, and we can launch this thing. So it's been a long wait, but soon we'll be able to actually play this DEAI board game that folks have been working on for so long. And it's really exciting. The look of it is really cool. It's like fresh, it's fun. So I'm pleased to finally be able to tick that one off. And then last year, the Twin Cities and Fargo Moorehead groups decided to collaborate together, take some of the learnings from the first year and start a new podcast. And we are just in the process now. So last year was a lot of planning around that. And then we started the official outreach for the guests for the podcast this last week. So at this week's meeting, we'll be doing some scheduling and getting it down. And this podcast is focusing on youth voices. So we looked at some racial justice topics and reached out to youth and said, what are your thoughts? What are your questions around these topics? What would you want to hear around an episode? And we'll be featuring those voices and then bringing on guests who can sort of address what youth were raising in those questions. So a lot of exciting work has continued. But during that second year, we also saw a drop off, as I mentioned, in some of the guests. So in looking at year 3, it was really time to sit down and think about what is it that we need in order to continue this work, and what is it that we need in order to do bigger and better things. And part of that is recruiting new folks, bringing in new perspectives and new skills into the group. And part of that, the group members decided during one of our retreats, we've had 2 retreats over the last couple of months. And in the first retreat, I'm used to really being enmeshed in the ideation process and working with the group to come up with ideas. But I hired an external facilitator to bring in some new and fresh ideas and techniques. And during some of the ideation process, the group got up to go work outside, get some sunlight, work on things. And I got up and the facilitator was like, no, David, you sit down, you stay in here. And when I went to go check on them and see how their progress was coming, they had totally flipped everything. They were like, David, we don't want to work regionally anymore. We all want to work together. We all want to work on one big project together. And so the new idea, they're going to be continuing and wrapping up this youth-focused podcast, but they want to be working on racial justice youth summits. So that's going to be summits where youth come and learn about racial justice in each area, and then use their own skills to sort of build something around that. Maybe they make a zine about what they learned. Maybe they make a song about what they learned. Maybe they make a short documentary or a TikTok, whatever it is that they're into. And so we've been planning over the last couple of months, what do we need to accomplish this? What are the skills we need? What are the connections we need? Who are experts we can bring in to do this work? Where are partnerships? How much money do we need? And so now we're working a lot more collaboratively across the regions, which really allows a lot more skill use. If we need something, you're not stuck in the region that you are. You can use skills from someone in another regional group. You can use time from someone in a regional group. You can be collaborating with someone. And so we're really excited to see where that goes. We've decided that this year, this fiscal year, we're going to be really focusing on the planning for this so that in the future years, we can kick them off and have them be as successful as possible. And hopefully those racial justice youth summits will rotate through regions. So we're figuring out which region is going to be the first one we focus on, starting the process of learning and studying, and then reaching out to some partners and really trying to kick them off. So that's where we are. I think we just finished our last summit weekend before last. Was it that recent? So yeah, that's a brief summary of the project so far. And now I want to open it up to our group members and to Robbie and ask some questions around the work. I think the first question I would want to raise is for you, Robbie. I'm curious about how this project came to be. Even this whole thing was ideated before I became a part of it. I was hired to do the work. And so in the process of applying for that grant, what were you hoping to accomplish? What are some of the things that inspired this project? Where did it come from?
Yeah, happy to weigh in a little bit on that. Definitely stop me if I go too long, because the work has a really long lineage, beginning with really the creation of the Race Are We So Different exhibit. That the development started up in 2004, right around 2004, with the exhibit coming on line at the museum in early 2007. It was at the museum for 4 months, and it was set up as a traveling exhibit. So then traveled North America before coming back here in 2015. One of the key developers for that is Joanne Jones-Rizzi, who's our museum's current Vice President of Science, Education, and Equity, so the department that David and I work within. And along with creating the exhibit, Joanne came into that work really with community engagement right alongside that, and recognizing that the exhibit itself is a resource, but the relationships that go into creating that exhibit and the relationships that are developed through programming related to it are what really makes it come to life. Like, an exhibit is really a static resource, no matter how interactive you make it. And there's a lot of time that goes in between being able to update it. So from 2007 to 2019, it took that long for us to actually make significant updates to the exhibit. But the things that can change more quickly are programming and work that goes into place that is more, I would say, characterized as community engagement work. So I got involved in work related to the race exhibit several years before this STEM RJ project came to be. And that got me initially connected to racial justice advocates in the Fargo Moorehead area, in the Rochester area, and in the Worthington area of southwestern Minnesota, where we were placing small versions of our race exhibit and then doing some deeper community engagement work. And all of that, again, is really built around this idea that we as an institution have a place in this work, and in the work of specifically as a science museum in this, thinking about anthropology as a scientific body of work, and that we have a role to play as an educational resource. But that community, we can't just show up in communities and helicopter in and say, hey, we got some grant funding, we're going to show up, and then when the grant funding's done, we move away. I think more and more organizations like ours recognize that. But to actually do that work and stay committed to it, I think this work and seeing, that Fred and Jared, Fred, somebody who came into the project in the latest iteration of the work, but Jared, somebody who we got to be in relationship with back in 2017, 2018, before the STEM RJ project. And really is something that's a deep commitment that we have, of saying, like, it takes deep time to build trust from us as a large organization to be working with a mixture of individuals and individuals connected to organizations who are already in their own and embedded in their own communities. So thinking deeply about how do we create a new community across spaces where people already have relational connections, and then thinking really deeply about, needing to build reciprocal relationships, and that spans everything from the compensation and recognizing that community members who we partner with are bringing in expertise, whether that's expertise, that you'd write in on a resume, or expertise based on your lived experience and being somebody who just lives and breathes in a specific community, to then finding ways to move from grant funding to operational funding. And that's really where we are right now with this work, saying, like, this is important work that needs to keep happening regardless if we've got grant funds or not, and we need to be finding patience to be able to be in relationship, and we trust that there will be products that support both the museum's goals and, most importantly and especially, the communities within which our community partners are living and working.
Thank you so much, Robbie. My next question is going to be for Fred and for Jared. And I think it's sort of a two-parter. I think the first part is, like, what did you learn about collaborating with, like, museums or large institutions throughout this process?
Yeah, I would say for myself, I learned that there is a lot of flexibility and restrictiveness all at the same time, right? There's a lot of places where you can do a whole lot, and then there's just certain times where there's a boundary that's created, and that's kind of what it is, due to either the grant restrictions or different things like that. And so for me, I thought it was a very underwhelming experience, because when you hear about the Science Museum of Minnesota, you typically think, very large hierarchical situation, and just getting a call from Robbie at first, like, hey, is this something you'd be interested in? When I was in college, that was a really interesting call because he wasn't like forcing me to, or he wasn't saying that I had to. It was really up to me. And ever since that time, working with David and the other folks that we've worked with, we've seen like the human side to the museum. And I thought that that was amazing as well. Like working with a big, large institution, you see that there are these intricate people who do a lot of things that you can relate to. And so I thought that working with the museum kind of showcased to me that we don't always know everything about these large institutions and that there's a lot more to them, but there's still somewhat some restrictions every once in a while.
Yeah, good stuff. You know, building on that, I was very excited by the way that the museum came in and was intentional about the community leading the work. And so, and the effort that they put into it and the time, it was something that I had not seen. I don't see many outside agencies, coming into the community, to assist. A lot of them are kind of locally homegrown or already exist. And so it was a new process. I think they brought in some resources, some knowledge that assisted our community. They were very intentional about us leading it, not dictating the work. And it just felt good. It felt like the right thing. And so it's continued to feel like the right thing. And so I think it's a great collaboration and an example of how a museum can partner with a community.
Yeah, I've got to say, as like, again, the institution that can be seen as the faceless institution, but recognizing that, right, like all of our institutions have been created by people and have a whole series of people that intentionality is super key. And I think I've learned too, as I think about even just the name of y'all's the game that's come to be, like from allies, accomplices, and bystanders, that in racial, like just the interesting parallels between just like an individual thinking about what it means to step into racial justice work as me, a white-bodied person, to then an organization that's representing more of like a system and how an organization can perpetuate things. But just as like how thoughtful we have to be about and acknowledging what our opportunities and at the same time our limitations are as we're coming into a space. And that if you can start with that and be really clear with ourselves about that's a space to be able to build trust. And that you need to be in constant communication, because over these the 5+ years that we've been engaging with folks within specifically Fargo, Moorehead, and the Rochester areas, we've had to make pivots, and David talked about that at different points in the process. And it's taken time to get us to a point where like we were the ones who came in and said, hey, we found funding. We think this is a cool idea. If you think it's not, we'll go kick rocks. We'll go walk down another street, or we'll step away from this. But if you think it's interesting, we're committed for the long term. And now we are in a space where, again, the going is slow, but we are in a space where we've moved from like, hey, we'd like you to contribute to this project that we think is cool, to like, I think we are in a more co-creative and collaborative space, which means even a different type of checking in, throughout, but a space where I think we can be really more adaptive and reactive and proactive to what is going on in the actual communities that we want to be connecting with.
Thank you, folks. I'm curious if you have learned about what it means to collaborate with other people in your community, Fred and Jared. So maybe you've learned a lot of things about what it's like to work with a larger institution. What have you learned about what it's like to work with one another? I know that there has been a lot of like working in the project, and then it's like, all right, you, Fred and Jared, you're going to work on this thing together. Then you're going to come back to the larger group and share. What are some of the learnings that y'all have had about collaborating with people within your region or across regions?
I think that was probably my favorite part, was the collaboration kind of outside of the project and within the projects that we created. because now I have a deeper relationship with the Jer or with the Marika. And so if I'm in the Twin Cities, there are things that I can be a part of now. When I'm in Moorehead, there are things that I can be a part of now. Like even David coming up here pretty soon here, like these are connections and collaborations that I don't think would have happened intently, right? I think that they could have happened because we just all were working together, but now they're kind of like, now we're forming bonds and creating more opportunities, not just in the project, but outside of the project. And I've never been a part of something where that is not only okay, but like replicated continuously in a way that continues to happen, where there's a new project and people are invited in, or there's a new resource and those things are shared out. I think that the ability to have this cross collaboration between all of these different thought movers and shakers has allowed us to really grow as a people. Like right, like I think I've grown just in my organization because of the connections that I've had with the Science Museum of Minnesota and the people who are working on these projects. So I think it's been pivotal for sure.
Yeah, and building on that, one thing I learned is that, when obviously knowing some of the group members as we've persisted, and then also how you may know someone in one capacity, and then right, we enter into this project, and then it, like David said, it can go in one direction, and then you can have people fall off with various things, jobs changing and whatnot. So the biggest thing too is that there's a couple things here. So one, so maintaining that friendship, that connection with those that maybe have fell off, and understanding that we're still on it, but we did lose a couple folks that were very pivotal, in my kind of world. I interacted with them day to day. And so not casting judgment, and trying to move away from that, but also at that time, maybe feeling a little bit like, wow, I thought maybe y'all were going to help out a little bit more. So also being real with that and feeling kind of let down, but then understanding that it's not about me. And so that was one thing that I had to learn, and then how to continue that relationship with those group members that fell off. And so that's a piece that I think, we haven't focused on or really, really talked about heavy, but that's a component to this. What do you do when you lose a member that you worked with in a community? The other thing that's also been very clear to me too is this concept of gatekeeping the work. And I become more and more mindful of this, as I get older, but younger, but that you don't want to be the one that prevents others from achieving, this level of experience, but then also understanding that if you do fall off and you step aside, that there may be a chance that the work either slows down even more or possibly falls away. And so there is some larger commitment that one has to take about understanding your role. But then also what I've really learned is how the youth are really gonna, drive our future, right, and our focus. And so I work primarily with older youth, but then kind of framing, my prospective audience, and then being open to, changing that, right, as I work with college students, but then thinking about, hey, let's focus more on, adolescent youth, or, and so that's been something that I've had to, just be willing.
Absolutely. I really appreciate a lot of what you were saying in that first half there about kind of looking at accountability and like what it means to live up to your responsibilities, and also what it means to like move through the work with grace and understand that people have a lot of things going on in their life, and that what it means to show up might look different for other people. That's been something we've been really trying to work around and work through over the last year as it moved out of this grant funded process and into something that we're caring for and taking care of together, and something that we're like looking at recruiting around. How do we make sure that people that we're bringing into the project are people who have the space and capacity, and when they aren't, how do we handle that with grace, and how do we move through the project. It's a little cheesy to say, but like with love, like, because the work is about caring for community, caring for one another, and being bonded in our personal experiences. And so it's been a lot to learn, but I feel like the project is getting better and that group members are getting closer and closer. Part of that is the length of time we've been working together, but I also think we've been spending more time trying to get together in person. I'm trying to spend more time going directly to the communities rather than just working remotely all the time. And it's been really awesome to see these connections deepen. Robbie, I've got a question for you around, like, this project seems really self-contained, but it's not by any means the only project that our department works on. And I'm wondering how this project has impacted our community engagement practices, whether this, like, being a part of this project has changed some of your approaches or the way that you think about new work you want to take on or existing projects that we have.
As we've all been talking, some of the notes I was taking start with more like an acknowledged limitation that I've got with this, of like, this is one piece of a number of different projects and initiatives that our department is working on, and especially having it move from grant funding to operational funding. I do find that it's challenging, and I'm limited at times in keeping other staff at the institution knowledgeable about what we've got going on, because we're not churning out products and we don't have like a grant-based timeline that says, all right, every quarter we're going to be creating X, Y, or Z, or a new podcast every 2 months, and that we, in moving at the pace of the relationships that we're building, and in recognition of the fact that, like, yeah, this is me and David's and our colleagues at the museum's 40-hour-a-week work to focus on this type of work, that this is just a snapshot and a piece of Jared's work, of Frederick's work, of other people who are in this project. That advocating and finding ways to just communicate updates with folks is a challenge, also an opportunity. To think about, okay, all right, how do we package this together? And so when I think about this in the context of learnings across the different type of community engagement work that we have, is I think there's great strength in the way that we've set this project up and reaching out to and connecting with really, we don't have young people from like 14-year-old to like 90-year-old intergenerational work, but I would say that this is intergenerational work that we've got going on, and recognizing that in the commitment to have there be long-term relationships, that we're finding space to create, onboarding and sort of on-road paths for other people to get involved in the project and create space for that emergent strategy. And so I think for me, like somebody I've not read cover to cover, but Adrienne Maree Brown's emergent strategy book, but like utilize it and look to it as like a key resource, and to move beyond just the jargon of like, oh, it sounds really fun to say like, oh yeah, we embrace emergent strategy and it's all woo woo. But like, I think this is really an example, along with some of our other work, of being able to give voice to a type of work and a body of work that is similar to other things that we're doing in our department, and that other people at our institution and other large institutions like ours, like, maybe have heard that, or who want to embrace more social justice work or equity centered work, are like, oh yeah, I've heard about that emergent strategy stuff, like that's really cool. But to actually unpack that and realize, like, yes, you've got to think about this metaphorically. You've got to find creative ways to communicate and invite and share out and have deep patience for this work. And so I think I find more and more the necessity, especially with other positional leaders in my institution, is like recognizing those spots where it's like, oh, you've heard about this work, but you don't really know what it takes to do this work, to get clearer for myself about, all right, what are the like 5 talking points I need to bring up in a meeting to be like, you need this, this, and this to better understand and see illustrated what it takes to do this type of deep work, and see a future where how this actually changes our institution for the better, to be ever more relevant within our communities.
Awesome. I'm gonna throw y'all a softball, and then we can sort of move into some of these questions that are popping up in the chat. the same old question we always get: what is something you're really proud of accomplishing within this project? And then what is something that's been really challenging for you within this project? And that can be each of you.
I'll go. So I'm proud that, like you had mentioned, when we were all out there on that rooftop and we all came together. And one thing I'm proud of is to be a part of something that's statewide, and that has the ability to kind of touch all angles and then even cross over to the river, right? And I know we say Fargo, and we won't include the whole state of North Dakota. We'll just say Fargo because, but anyway, there may be tentacles, but so it's something like that. So something bigger, than like the buildings that I walk through each day. That's something I'm very proud of, because it gives it gives myself a greater sense of responsibility that's larger than, my house or my job or even my community. And then I start to become onerous of, more of the work. So that's something I'm proud of. Something that's probably a challenge to me is how do you bring in more people? But then understanding that you can bring in more people, but then their catch-up speed vary. And so it's continuously practicing that grace, that love, once again, not taking things personal, understanding progress moves slow. So that's also what's challenging when the process is a little bit different than your day-to-day, right? Like Robbie had mentioned, you're used to returning out things every day in our job, and then to enter into things that take more time. So just readjusting, my operational kind of framework and time frame, that's been challenging, but it's been beneficial to be a part of because it's adding a skill set. So
I'd say I'm really proud, again, from my space of like advocating for and positionally like leading this work as a director within our institution, of finding creative ways to be able to keep the financially support and resource the work, and not allow for excuses either elsewhere from the museum or getting too busy or needing a focus from my own department to be looking elsewhere, and to be able to really commit to a long-term resource-based support there. The other one is more on like the social resources. That's a challenge for me, is having moved from a program manager type role and somebody who's been really in David's role, and even before that doing like more direct service, directly working with folks, is finding those right spots where like I haven't been at the dinners. I haven't been, and like letting go of some of the one-on-one deeper relationships that I was able to develop earlier on in the work, and figuring out that just relational balancing point of like, what is enough and how do I need to best show up to be in the right relationship with the folks who are involved in the work, and not be so distant that like I'm showing up and each time I show up it has to be a like reintroduce myself from the ground, from zero, but also not be so into the work that I'm not focusing on, how do we resource this over the long term.
Absolutely. For myself, I am proud of so much that this group has accomplished. In the process, I think is more important than the product, right? I think that there are these things that we have gone through, like growing pains and different things like that, that have made me so happy to be a part of this group, because there's just not a lot of large institutions doing this work in a way that they're really going to allow the community members to make the choices and make the decisions. Like I've had people say that they want to practice a model similar to the Science Museum, but then they're still the ones like telling us what we can and cannot do. And so I think that I've been very proud of this process of seeing like what we've been able to create when the rules are not there, right? What we've been able to do when none of the people who are funding the project are there, and we're just there, and we come up with these ideas, and so much comes about. And so me being a youth-centered person, like I focus on youth 14 to 24, that's all I focus on typically. And so I love that most of our projects have also been geared towards youth. And I love working with Jared too, because he was once like my professor type of guy at NDSU. And so going from mentor to colleague is an amazing thing that I think is so important in this work, because if we don't continue to pass the baton, it won't happen. And so thinking about even now, a new person on our team was seeing me as a mentor and is now my colleague. And so I think that this passing the baton, so forth and so forth, is beautiful. And that's a part of the process. That's not necessarily the product. Like we can't really measure that part, right? But I think one thing that's been really difficult for me as somebody who has a full-time job, co-founding something and doing 16 hours of volunteer work weekly, finding space and time to do this work, while also knowing that I work in social work. So if we give people grace and we give people chances, at some point we're enabling them to continue that behavior. And I think that's been a very difficult, challenging part of this work, is collaborating. And we typically need the whole team to be on board to move to the next thing. And if people don't show up to meetings, or if people don't do that, there's this kind of like, oh, well, we love you and we give grace, and then it just continues to happen. And so I think that that's always been a challenge for me, just because this isn't my first, second, or third thing that I'm doing. But it's always a thing that gives me joy to be a part of the meetings and learn and grow with the rest of the group.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. So I think there are some questions in the chat that we can work through. The first one is from Brad. It says, you seem to have had success moving from the resource cannibalization mindset that often plagues nonprofits to a resource sharing model. What's your secret? Robbie, I think that's probably best for you.
Well, it would be great to say it feels like there's one, you know, the one stake to kill the vampire, but it's certainly things that have worked for us. I was, as you put that, I was beginning to type and I was like, I think like it sounds so overly simple and like hokey, but like starting from relationship and starting it from there and giving voice to trusting that we will create something meaningful, but we're not going to, like, the depth of meaning in whatever product we create is going to be limited if we move too quickly into that. And we even saw that as challenges, and like not being able to necessarily create full, final, tidy products after this year that brought us all together, of the funding from the National Science Foundation for the STEM RJ project. Of like, we had a very, like, we were fighting a production mindset from there. And so I think for me, it's really thinking about like, and that leads to your other question about like, how does a BIPOC centered project change the institutional culture of the museum? Is me as like a white bodied leader giving voice to the fact that, like, coming out of our very first kickoff meeting for the STEM RJ project, that like people gave verbal voice to, and in our like reflection questionnaire after that, was like, it felt so restorative to be in a space that was vast majority BIPOC identified folks. And for me to figure out how, as a white person, to not feel defensive and be like, oh, they're telling me like I don't have a role in this, I've got to just erase myself, I shouldn't be here at all. There are times where I shouldn't be there and I have no need to be there, but there are other times where I need to be able to really watch, and as a, you know, in a white centered institution, a white bodied person, figure out how to recognize that, give voice to it, and then in spaces beyond the project, call that out and be like, this is what works. And it does start sometimes from a place of just representational diversity. But had we not also put certain places in for people to truly feel welcomed and be able to share who they were in that space, in that process of getting to know each other, it would have also been just another check mark of like a census based kind of thing. And I could have gone back as the white, you know, happy pat myself on the back white leader of like, yeah, we had like 90% Black and Indigenous and people of color people who were in this meeting and who have been part of the project. But like, to circle it all back around, like that relational and continuing to really focus and give voice to the fact that this starts from a collective relationship building experience. That's the biggest piece that supports the group working together long term and has the potential, I think, for making institutional change, positive institutional change.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and add a little bit to that, on the being in the community. And there isn't like an immediate trust that is given, say, to an institution. And so part of the process too that we went through is that we had folks that had various experience with museums and at times were very skeptical and of the museum's intent, right? And so one thing that I seen was how they navigated that, and how they could have said, wow, it feels like y'all are pushing us away, but they navigated that space. I don't know how they did it internally, right? But on the other side, being the member and seeing some of our members say, well, we think y'all have alternative motives, right? And then having that conversation was something that was very valuable. And so that it wasn't always just like, right? There was times where trust had to been earned and negotiated.
I know I'm supposed to host, but I can't help adding just a thing or two in there, which is like in terms of adapting a resource sharing model. One of my main concerns throughout holding the role that I have at the museum is about how relationships live with individuals. And so if I'm to disappear, some of the relationships that exist within this project would disappear. If Robbie were to disappear, it's the same thing. And so if we're hoping to create long-term change over the museum, we have to start thinking about how we can enshrine the work in ways that make it last. And some of that is in doing internal culture work aside from the project. So like we're doing this project called institutional genealogy, where we look at the history of our institution from inception all the way until today and say, what have our relationships been with the community? Where have we fallen short? Where have we delivered harm? So that when I'm not here and people say, why are we doing so much work with Native communities? Like, we have a land acknowledgement, haven't we done enough? Someone can look at this document and be like, well, here in this year, we had Native funerary remains on display. And here we had a really big snafu in 1990, and the Native community was really mad at us. Like, we have a lot to live up to. We have a lot to be accountable for. Here's the reasons that we're doing the work. And then also pushing museums into making more long-term and tangible goals, where sometimes the goal is like, we want to have better relationships with BIPOC communities. And I'm almost always like, which ones? What does that look like? How do you measure success over what period of time? And so starting to be like, we want to see 15% higher Hmong population visitors within our museum. We're going to be doing that by doing this Hmong-centered project, by working with this Hmong artist. Here's how we know whether this has been successful. Here are the points in which we check, like doing long-term strategization and finding those historical reasons that your institution needs to be involved in the work helps to make sure that this resource sharing continues and is not just coming from one person's mindset, which is a lot of what addresses from our side Marika's question around accountability models that we're evolving and developing. Like, how do we stay accountable to community? But I also would add on my side for accountability, part of that is recognizing my own capacity, what I can and can't do. So in this third year, we've created a coordinator role on the community side that says, hey, when someone doesn't show up for a meeting, I can't always be the person who's like, I got to catch you up. I'm going to have a whole nother hour meeting to catch you up on what you missed. And like finding someone on the community side who's willing to take on a little bit of extra work to send out notes afterwards or to do touch bases or things of that nature, that helps us be accountable. Fred and Jared, do you have ways in these last retreats that we've been talking about, like how do we be accountable to one another? Any share outs that you have or reflections that you've had on trying to figure out ways we can be more accountable?
Yeah, one thing I think that I've seen that we've been very intentional is understanding what is our capacity and what are we good at. So just kind of naming what we're good at or what skill we have, and then also when are we busy, right? So literally putting down the calendar and then saying, hey, February, I'm just off the map, April, I'm off the map, and so not committing, but then also giving self permission to exit the process, but in advance, not just all of a sudden finding ways to make way. So yeah, that's a couple of things I've seen.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that we do is kind of what Jared was talking about. Is like, what are your strengths? And when are times that you need to like kind of lower the work amount. And then we have like even months where we kind of select like this will be our busiest month because most people have selected that this is not a problematic month for us. And so I appreciate that always because typically in trying to pick where we're about to do this next thing, the first thing that came to mind for most people was what do I have in this year and what is possible for me in this year? And I appreciated us just having that conversation because we came to terms with, for some people, this is going to be a way busier year than next year. And so I appreciate that sharing because oftentimes there is not space to share that, or there is a fear of sharing that and being either X'd out of the project or something of that sort.
And then the last question that we have in the chat is, where have we landed with this being rooted in STEM? Like we are a science museum and this is a racial justice project. So like, how do we balance STEM and racial justice? I know from my perspective, it's been really helpful for me to think about racial justice work as social science. I think a lot of times people have been like, well, where's the science element? I'm like, well, the social science is a science, and not feeling limited by, oh, we have to have someone in a lab coat talking about something of that nature. But then also looking at, in any variety of projects, we're able to reach out to folks who have a STEM background who can talk about, say, medical imbalances or racial disparities in the medical system. And looking at, when we're talking about a topic, there are still lots of STEM-based professionals that we can reach out to or have conversations with, feature on a podcast, things of that nature. And so trying to make sure that we still have that opportunity and that representation of BIPOC folks in STEM fields while not feeling limited by it. Any reflections from Fred, Jared, or Robbie around that?
Yeah, I think too, not like you said, not just thinking of that white coat has been very beneficial. It's just reframing, and then also the arts, and so the STEAM kind of aspect of STEM has been something that I've also seen.
Yeah, and I think we can so easily, when you see an acronym, you think about those as like four distinctly unique and not connected pieces that make up STEM, or add in the arts, and that they aren't connected. And that I think, even though, like, I would say we've had less explicit conversations about like, well, what is, how do you define STEM or something like that, that there's an interconnectivity around all of those, and that results in the product, and the fact that, oh, hey, we've got really technology-based products in a podcast, and this web-based game that will be coming online. So like, that is a real, like, if somebody asks, and really from an the National Science Foundation piece has to do that, and recognizing, yeah, that science, technology, like, these are all cultural experiences or cultural, sort of products of how we organize ourselves, and they are acculturated systems that I've never received really deep pushback of like, wait, y'all aren't doing actual, y'all shouldn't be doing this. Why, or coded, why are you all doing this? This isn't in alignment with us. And I think that goes to speak for the advocacy that we've had else, leading up to this, and the fact that we have this whole exhibit that has then been a catalyst for this type of relationship-based programming.
Yeah, folks, we have run long, so we're going to wrap it on up, but we really appreciate folks dropping in, checking out what we've been working on, and we hope to have the opportunity to share with you some future developments as we continue to be rooted in this work. Fred, Jared, Robbie, thank you all for making some time for that this morning. Thanks to all the folks who joined us in the audience. We really appreciate it.